El futuro. En esta lección van a aprender a usar el tiempo verbal, el futuro. Now, I have to make sure you understand the difference between me saying el tiempo verbal, the verbal tense, the future, and what you've been using so far to sort of compensate for the future before learning it. What you've been using so far is called the simple future. This is the simple future. The simple future is simply the construction ir plus a plus infinitive, or as you would say in English, going to do something. So voy a comprar un carro is simply I'm going to buy a car. Now, what you're about to learn as far as el tiempo verbal, the tense future, doesn't use this construction at all. In fact, the equivalent to English, which is the closest we can get, is using the word will instead of going to do something, so that you will buy a car. It's a lot more definitive. El tiempo futuro. So let's start off with three verbs: conservar, proteger, and exigir. Notice I picked an AR, an ER, and an IR verb. This is extremely different from anything you've learned, because up until now, whenever you've learned a new tense, you have dropped that AR, ER, and IR and replaced it with something. But for future tense, and I like to think that it is the case because it hasn't happened yet, we actually don't drop anything. We add to the ending. These are the endings that you're going to add to AR, ER, or IR verbs. They're actually the same for all of the types of verbs, simply because you're adding, you're not getting rid of the ending, so you don't need to compensate for the fact that there's a difference between an AR, an ER, and an IR. For this, you're actually just adding these, as, a, hemos, han. So, for example, to say I will conserve, I am not going to get rid of the AR ending in conservar. Instead, I'm going to add my E with the accent ending to the verb and say conservaré. And that within itself means I will conserve. So by not dropping that AR, you're actually pretty much equivocating it to the word will in English. Protegerás, tú protegerás. By adding the AS, I'm saying you will protect. Exigirás, you will insist. And we can go down the line. Protegeremos, we will protect. Conservaremos, we will conserve. Exigirán, they or you will insist. And so forth. So hopefully you realize after noticing this that this is actually a pretty easy concept. You don't even have to bother with what the ending of the verb originally is. You simply add as, a, hemos, han for the appropriate subject, and you get the future tense. Let's try some examples to make sure you get the hang of it. So I want to say tomorrow we will talk with the programmer. We take the cluster over here that's going to give us the verb meaning. We will talk. First thing, talk is hablar. And to add the we will part, we will find the appropriate future tense ending to add to hablar. And we end up with hablaremos. And our whole sentence is mañana hablaremos. You can add nosotros if you wanted to. Hablaremos con el programador. Ejemplo 2. Will you see the satellite program with me? I'm obviously throwing futuristic or technology-related vocab at you with this just to be ridiculous. So, will you see the satellite program with me? The will you see is going to be our verb information. So, to see is ver. The you will part is going to come from verás. We can actually continue our sentence from here. Verás el programa por satélite conmigo. Just a side note, in case you have not learned the rule for conmigo, anytime you have con and mi next to each other, they become conmigo. That's just a little side note. Ejemplo 3. I will study computer science. So for this one, I will study is our main information for when we choose our verb. We know to study is estudiar. And the I will portion of that is going to come with the E with the accent. Estudiaré. Again, you can add yo if you wanted to. Estudiaré informática. Ejemplo 4. Now for this one, let's find again our main source of verb conjugation, which is you will buy. And from you will buy, we get that because we've got will, we need to use the infinitive of the verb instead of dropping an AR for comprar, which is our verb to buy. And now we need to choose the appropriate ending for you. Comprarás, and of course you could use comprará if it's a more formal situation. Comprarás un disco duro nuevo pronto. I'm sure by now, whenever you've learned a new verb form in Spanish, after you got the hang of it, the teacher says, well, here are the irregularities. The good news is that future tense doesn't have that much irregularity. However, it does have a few verbs that have an irregular infinitive. So instead of having an irregular ending, there are some that for the future tense, their infinitives change just a tad and become a little bit irregular when we do put them in the future tense. Here's a list of the verbs that are irregular in the future tense. And again, the way that they're irregular is that they will have the same endings, but their infinitives will be slightly different for the future tense. So instead of saying decir as our infinitive base, we're going to use dir. So diré would be the way for me to say that I will say something. Haré would be my way of saying I will do something. If we go here to the right, saldré de mi casa, I will leave. Sabré la verdad, I will know. And so forth. One that is important to mention as you copy this down is that habré, or habrá, I should say. Habrá is the future of the there is, there are. You know it as I in the present tense. So habrá is there will be. So habrá 20 estudiantes en la clase. There will be 20 students in the class. Let's do a couple more examples to make sure now you have the hang of not just the future tense, but the irregular forms of the future tense. So this program will make all the calculations. In this case, we're going to underline the will make. This program, este programa, we can kind of in our heads when we go to conjugate replace with el. So will make, we know that to make is hacer. So we use our new infinitive because it's irregular. This is our new infinitive. Hará. And then todos los cálculos. Ejemplo 6. The technician will come at 8. So we know that our unit here of meaning that we will need when we put our verb together is will come. The technician is el técnico. And we know we want to use venir, but venir in this situation, once again, it is irregular in terms of its infinitive. So we need to use our irregular vendre, and it is él, so vendrá a las 8. Tu turno. Now it is your turn to try these by yourself and see how comfortable you feel with the present tense without my guidance. Completa las siguientes oraciones, luego escribe la traducción al inglés. This is a two-part exercise where not only do you complete the sentences with the appropriate future tense form of the verbs in parentheses, but you also translate to English to make sure that you practice actually knowing what you're saying. Buena suerte!